Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Psychology of Emotion. Got a full plate ahead of us. We're going to go ahead and introduce Homework 2. And notice that Homework 2 spans over both Lecture 2 and 3. And it's designed, again, to have 6 people. Penelope's right on the spot here, so she's gonna help us through this. We're gonna talk Hellenistic and medieval theologies of emotion. So we're moving forward in time. We're building on the philosophy, and we'll see the religion that contributes to our understanding of emotion. And eventually, we're going to get up to the psychology part. So let us begin. And from the Latin modus translates to movement, and this is a fascinating word, right? And it's the soul can be conceptualized as having different functions, different movements, and you can see where motivations might be part of this conceptually, right? The lower animal soul, passion, love, hate, anger, fear, anger, and we're going to talk about basic and complex emotions throughout this course, and you can see that the ancients are in fact kind of making these implications 2,000, 1,500 years ago, right? And then there's the appetites, hunger, thirst, and sexual desire. And if you are daring enough to take psychomotivation with me after you've been through this, right, you're going to see how that we begin to separate these ideas out as motives, drives, and higher level motivations. So the more virtuous, they come to us via the higher rational soul, and this indicates willful acts, and note that this kind of implies free will then, affections, love, sympathy, and joy. But this constant tension between basic emotions and complex emotions, and what is an emotion and what is a behavior, again, we're going to be dealing with this throughout the class, and I hope to see you have some defining characteristics when we get to the end of the course and you take on the task of creating your own definition of emotion. So we're going to talk about the Stoics, and the Stoics suggest one could live without emotion. So here we're talking emotional inhibition, and notice Confucian thought was similar to this inhibition, but in fact maybe immersing oneself in experiences that are emotional as well. So Confucian ideology often presents both sides of a coin, right? Now the Stoics are saying, hey, you can live without emotion. Certain aspects of emotion are within one's potential to control. And that's a fascinating idea in and of itself. They offered advice on moderating or eliminating emotions that had destructive effect on the soul. And note that anger is often one that's indicated in this area, that anger destroys relationships between people, but anger is also corrosive internally and damaging to the soul. To dwell in anger, right, is just to cause harm to oneself quite often. So this is a precursor to cognitive therapy, right? Changing one's belief potentially change one's emotional response, and that's kind of cool, right? When we start thinking that way this far back. But remember, the Stoics were speakers, and at that time they largely sold their skills to the highest bidders, maybe like today's lecturers, right? We go where we're paid, and we talk about what we're instructed to talk about. Although that last line, you can tell, is maybe not all that true. So the early Stoa interaction between body and soul represent the interaction of different types of matter, so that the soul and the body are really two different things. There's 4 stages of processing emotional phenomenon, and this is where we look at the early Stoa as really kind of having their psychological thinking cap firmly in place, right? Emotion processing stages. The first stage is impression, sensation, and this is sensory reception, and that's fascinating because that's, you know, when we study sensation and perception, that would be the first stage, right? And then the second is the assent perception, accepting sensory information as true, and this is largely an automatic process, especially if we look at Dan Gilbert, who said that belief is automatically supported and tied to perception. That it's more difficult to disbelieve. Belief is automatic, disbelief is effortful. Third, impulse action, that is acting on the sensory information. Now notice up to this point we really could be in a habitual stimulus response mode, right? But then fourth is the reason or initiates understanding. And this might be prior to choosing to act, or it might be if we just react, then analyzing the reaction after the fact. Okay? So early Stoic doctrine, bless you, sweetie, A little sneezy, huh? So, early Stoic doctrine, 4 emotion types, right? These are aligned to the 2 temporal dimensions. We come back to the importance of the 4th dimension in understanding emotional experience throughout this course. Present, well, in the present, there's pleasure or distress. So really what we're doing is looking at negative versus positive in the present and then describing it as pleasure or distress. Note, there's a lot of emotion theorists that really kind of focus on positive versus negative emotions. Now, that's some theorists. Other theorists kind of ditch that whole conceptualization. I'd be one of those. So we'll talk about that more as the class progresses. Now, future would be appetite, and this is, appetitive behavior towards an object, or fear, and that is something is going to happen but is not happening at the moment, right? These have a cognitive component that derives from past experience, and especially when we're projecting into the future, but even our experience of the present. So emotions perturb the soul, but if moderated by reason, peace, and this thing apatheia, right, can be attained. And notice that this is going to be the root word to apathy, which is to not care whatsoever. In this context, is experiencing a sense of peace, and we've already described this in terms of maybe achieving the golden mean, right? What are you doing today, sweetie? Come on, you're just being crazy. Let's say hello to everybody. Okay, so the middle Stoa then, while early Stoa prioritized the cognitive component expressed in belief and judgment attached to stimuli. And notice, this really presages classical conditioning, that is, actions are being tied to environmental stimuli. The middle Stoa suggests that belief judgment is not a necessary component for feelings and subsequent emotional arousal. So, notice that the middle Stoa are saying, I understand the early Stoa are saying that we don't have to have emotion. But the middle Stoa is kind of backing off on that and saying, well, emotion can arise outside of our control. So when we listen to music, we may feel, I think this is one of the better examples, feel emotion welling up in us, or maybe watching a certain video or a movie, right? And children and animals can be aroused by stimuli. And they're saying absent cognitions. I don't know what we want to think about that. But that is that emotional response may be beyond our immediate control, as acknowledged by the middle Stoa. So in this way, feelings were seen to precede emotions. And now what the hell is that? Because isn't a feeling an emotion? And now we get into a big conceptual issue when we're talking about this. Is a feeling an emotion? And perhaps not. And by the time we get to chapter 9, we're gonna have at this, maybe a little even before that maybe what comes first, thinking, what comes second, emotions, or is it the other way around? Are feelings emotions? Are emotions interpretations of feelings? There's a lot of questions that we can answer as we move through the course. But what they've done is they've laid the path to what's called emotion primacy, and that is emotion first, thought second. And this is an argument that took place way up into the 1980s and 1990s. So more on that as we move along. The late Stoa, like Seneca describes in his writings on anger, first movements don't achieve the level of emotions. Those first movements, maybe these sensations, these feelings, right? Or we're going to float a fancy term in a little while called affect. This arises, right? And they're involuntary. And notice the natural affects is the term employed here. They're preparations for emotional experience. So we're already laying the groundwork to use these two ideas, affect and emotion, as related but separate, right? They're propositions, they're subject to voluntary assents to become emotional experience. So I might have this affect arise in me, but what it becomes might be under my control. And now you see the Stoics are returning to the notion of control and our responsibility in our own emotional experience. Voila! Cognitive therapy is born. Look, 3 years of high school French was not wasted, let me put it that way. Since emotions are voluntary, changing associated beliefs, cognitions, and judgments, right, might affect then the emotion experienced. One can learn to predict the outcome of an emotional experience and thus exert control over one's responses. And this might be a component in anger management training, right? It might also be a way that cognitive behavioral therapy is used to combat clinical depression. So all these theoretical underpinnings for psychological treatment are being laid way back in the time of the Stoics, right? This represents the core of what we call emotional intelligence, and that is being clear, at least this portion of it, of our understanding of our experience, how it arises, what the potential consequences are, and moving to a point of choice in participating in that emotion or not, right? And this cat is out of control. She keeps trying to climb up my leg. So the Stoic cardinal virtues then, that is, what virtues should we adopt, should we make central to our existence? Well, wisdom, reflection, right? Temperance, moderation in all things, justice, doing justice, expecting justice, right? And courage. And we have a whole emotion and focus, courage element coming up. I think it's like 8.4 on our schedule, right? And Marcus Aurelius, and I love the name Marcus Aurelius. It's funny, when I was about 3 or 4 years old and I lived in Burbank, California, our next door neighbor, he always called me Marcus Aurelius, right? And I always thought that was funny as hell. I didn't know who Marcus Aurelius was at age 3, but I got there sooner or later. Now, one thing we're going to do a little differently, I am going to link to the philosophy of Stoicism, this YouTube clip. I think it's an awesome clip, but I'm not going to project it through the camera. So when you get to Carmen, you'll see it linked up. So part 1 of the lecture, and then this will exist, and then we'll go to part 2 after this. But let's get ready for our homework here. And this is 6 questions across 2 lectures, so, and this is found in the module where you find these lectures, right? This is exploring and applying emotion in Hellenistic, medieval, Enlightenment eras. 6 people working together in teams, and right, you self-assign to teams. We can help more with that in our next office hours and or meeting. If you're having trouble with it, or email me. Right. Again, we're going to go with 6 responses, and each person in the group selects a different one. So I want you guys to communicate with each other. I want you to get to know each other a little, and I want you to go through this, kind of the bartering session of who does what. And hopefully there's 6 different enough, and you guys are different enough that you come up with 6 different things for 6 different people, right? Then assemble all the pieces into a single Word document, submit via Carmen by the deadline. And here's another voila, in case you didn't get enough of the first. The document on Carmen can be used as a template to turn in the assignment, so I'm going to try and do that for you guys. And I think 2 or so paragraphs, maybe 3, should be sufficient to answer any one of these questions, right? So I'm not asking you to write novels, but I do want you to directly answer the question, right? And hopefully you find a question that you want to answer. So homework 2, this is number 1. Numbers 2 through 6 will follow as we move through the rest of this lecture and the next one. Okay. The Stoics, let's focus on the late Stoics. So if you like the Stoics, go with the Stoics. Consider Seneca's writing on anger by describing a situation which an actor, and that could be you, but you don't have to admit it, right? Or you can make something up, moves to the following. So within this scenario, something's going to arise, a natural affect that is labeled involuntary. Explain how that works. Their preparation for emotional experience, and explain what that might be and how it prepares one, right? How the affects are consistent with the coming emotional experience. Their propositions that are subject to voluntary assent, and that means that the actor has a choice to go with it or maybe not, to inhibit it, right? And describe the scenario where one moves through these steps. So you're telling a story, right? What is the instigating phenomenon? What triggered it? So we want to get back to that stimuli idea. How does it prepare one for the emotional experience, this process? And then how did it create the emotional expression? Or not, because we're looking at this as a voluntary mechanism at this point, right? Okay. So, end part 1 here. We'll go on to part 2.